Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Thomas. I'm 36 years old. For over a decade, I served in the United States Army as a logistics specialist, stationed across the globe: Iraq, South Korea, Kuwait, East Africa. You name it. Wherever the supply chain needed tightening, that's where they sent me. My record was spotless. 12 years, not one disciplinary mark. They called me, by the book Thomas. I didn't take shortcuts. I didn't look the other way. I believed the rules protected the mission, and the people on the front lines. I didn't expect that those same rules would be twisted to break me. It started at Camp Lankoro, Djibouti. Not exactly a 5-star posting, but strategic. Dusty hangars, harsh heat, and the endless rhythm of planes coming and going, full of everything soldiers needed to survive out in Somalia, Sudan, or the Gulf. I had been there for 6 months when I noticed the first inconsistency: a shipment of encrypted comms gear logged as transferred, but the receiving unit never filed a request. Then it was thermal scopes. Then engine parts. I traced every discrepancy back to one man, Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Kessler. He was new, too smooth, too political. The type who spends more time managing optics than logistics. He walked into command like he was auditioning for a Senate seat. But I didn't care about that. Not until I saw his name on every suspicious requisition trail. I did what I was trained to do. I compiled a report. 3 weeks of late nights, cross-checking manifests, confirming shipments that had vanished into thin air. I even flagged the exact authorization codes. $4.1 million in gear. Gone. When I walked into Kessler's office and dropped the report on his desk, I expected maybe resistance. Maybe even denial. What I got was worse. "You're too rigid for this job," he said, not even looking at the pages I'd spent hours compiling. "Modern warfare demands adaptability." I remember the hum of the AC in his office as he leaned back in his leather chair like I'd just told him a joke. Outside, the tarmac shimmered with heat. Inside, I went cold. "You're saying we ignore millions of dollars in losses?" I asked. "I'm saying we prioritize operational flow. Compromises are part of the game." Compromises. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't negligence. It was calculated theft, and I had just pointed a spotlight straight at it. Kessler dismissed me with a casual wave. "Is that all, Sergeant Thomas?" I saluted. "Yes, sir." I walked out of his office with the weight of the war on my back. Every stolen item meant one less piece of gear for a soldier counting on it. I couldn't let that stand. That night, I sent a secure message through the Criminal Investigation Division's internal reporting system. No fanfare. Just the facts. I thought I'd done the right thing. Instead, 24 hours later, I received discharge orders. Conduct unbecoming of a non-commissioned officer. Insubordination. No mention of the report. No mention of $4.1 million in missing gear. Just a vague note about my inability to adapt to evolving leadership dynamics. They made me the problem. I was escorted out of the base like a criminal. The soldiers I trained with. They stared at the ground as I passed. I couldn't even look Torres in the eye. She'd helped me dig through some of those manifests. Now I was radioactive. The message was clear: speak up, and you're gone. But what Kessler didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't sent just one report. I'd copied everything. Backups. Screenshots. Receipts. And I didn't just send it to CID. I sent it to someone I knew from my second tour in Kuwait, now working in the office of the Inspector General. By the time they kicked me off that base, it was already too late. Kessler thought he'd won. He didn't know the war had just started. They gave me 48 hours to clear out. 2 duffel bags, a footlocker, and a career that had taken 12 years to build, gone. No ceremony. No medals. Just a dishonorable whisper that I was insubordinate. No one dared say my name out loud. Specialist Torres caught me outside the admin building. Her eyes were wide, confused, and scared. "Sergeant Thomas, what happened?" I wanted to tell her everything. That the man we all saluted was a thief. That the military brass was willing to burn one of their own to protect a comfortable lie. That she was probably working on the same falsified manifests I just exposed. But instead, I lied. "Orders changed," I said, quietly. "You know how it is." She didn't believe me. I saw it in her face. But she nodded. Because in the army, knowing too much can be dangerous. At the terminal, I waited in silence for my flight back to Montana. I'd told my mom I was taking early leave. I couldn't bring myself to explain the truth. How do you tell someone who believes in service and honor that it all meant nothing? I sat in that military terminal for hours, watching planes take off, watching soldiers deploy into danger with gear that might not even exist when they got there. And all I could think was this. They erased me. A spotless record. Commendations. Combat tours. Gone, with a single memo from a man who should have been in cuffs, not command. The worst part? I started to doubt myself. Had I really been too rigid? Had I made a mistake? Maybe I should have looked the other way, just once. Saved my career. Stayed on track for retirement. But then I thought about the names. The soldiers whose gear had vanished. The ones out in Somalia with no comms. The ones waiting for night vision that would never arrive. What if one of them died because Kessler lined his pockets? That thought pulled me back to center. I wasn't the problem. I was the warning flare. And someone had noticed. As I waited in that terminal, a man in civilian clothes sat across from me. Military posture, but no rank on his shirt. He slid a card across the table. "Captain Reed." "Sid." "I read your report," he said, voice low and measured. "It's solid. Very solid." I blinked. Then why was I discharged? He looked me dead in the eye. "Because you embarrassed the wrong man, and the system protects its own, until it doesn't. But trust me, we're not done. And neither are you." He stood and left before I could say another word. I arrived in Billings, Montana to cold silence. My mom was happy to see me, sure, but I could see the worry behind her smile. My dad barely spoke. He didn't get why I left the army. I didn't blame him. He'd worked construction for 40 years. Loyalty meant everything to him. And here I was, discharged under a cloud of shame. The house felt too small. My future too blank. I spent most days in the garage, going over files I'd copied onto an encrypted USB drive, wondering if it had all been for nothing. Then, 3 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Captain Reed. "We need you in Denver. Tomorrow." He didn't ask. He told. When I walked into that federal building in downtown Denver, I was met by 2 people I didn't expect to see. Agent Rebecca Lynn, Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Colonel Mitchell, Army CID. They didn't waste time. "Your report was just the tip of the iceberg," Agent Lynn said, flipping through a thick dossier. "We've traced similar losses to 5 other bases. Different commanders. Same MO. But your data gave us the starting point." Colonel Mitchell pointed to a digital map glowing with red pins. "Africa. Germany. Kuwait. Even back in the States. This isn't just one corrupt officer," he said. "It's a global scheme. We believe Kessler is a key node, possibly even working with defense contractors under the table." I sat there in stunned silence. I'd thought I was chasing one bad man. Turns out, I'd unearthed a syndicate. But then came the blow I didn't expect. "You're still discharged," Mitchell said. "We can't undo that. Not yet. Not without compromising the investigation." "But..." Agent Lin slid another document across the table. "We want to bring you in as a civilian consultant." That night, in a tiny Denver apartment provided by the agency, I stared at the document that had flipped my fate. A formal offer, classified access, a top-tier clearance reinstated, and a seat at the table. I hadn't been silenced. They just kicked me into a better position. Because now, I wasn't in the army anymore. I was working above it. Most people think betrayal comes with shouting, slammed doors, maybe even a knife in the back. But betrayal in the military? It's colder. It's paper-thin silence. It's an email that erases your rank. A look that says, "You're done," before you even know what you've stepped into. Now I was sitting in a secured federal building in Denver, staring at a wall of screens, knowing I hadn't just exposed one man, I'd stepped into something far more complex and dangerous than I could have imagined. "Look at this," Agent Rebecca Lynn said, pulling up images. Photos of crates. Pallets of gear. Markings I recognized instantly, encrypted communication units, night vision goggles, ballistic software kits. Only they weren't in any U.S. base. These photos were taken at contractor outposts in Kenya, Poland, and Saudi Arabia. My stomach dropped. This was our equipment. Marked for deployment to combat units. And now it was in the hands of third-party private firms, mercenaries, essentially, who were never supposed to touch this kind of gear. "These came from Camp Lankoro?" I asked. "Some of them, yes. Others from Ramstein, Kandahar, and even Fort Hood." Agent Lin turned her screen again. "You weren't the only one with eyes on the discrepancies. But you were the only one who had the courage to send the report up the chain. That gave us jurisdiction." Colonel Mitchell leaned forward, tapping a thick file marked confidential, eyes only. "We've identified a pattern of falsified transfer orders, coordinated across multiple regions, dating back at least 3 years. And it's all being funneled through logistics officers like Kessler," I added. "Correct. But he's not the mastermind. He's a facilitator." "What's the scale?" Mitchell didn't blink. "Estimated $47 million, so far." In that moment, I realized what I'd stumbled into wasn't just criminal, it was systemic. The military's sprawling web of supply chains, poorly audited and easily manipulated, had become a feeding trough for greedy officers and opportunistic contractors. And all it took to keep the scam going was one thing. Silence. But I hadn't stayed silent. And now? Now I was in a position to finish what I started. I worked 14-hour days in that Denver office. No uniform. No rank. Just my skills and the silent fire of a man who knew his life had been scorched for telling the truth, and who wasn't going to let that sacrifice be in vain. I reviewed thousands of pages of logs, requisition forms, financial audits, and contractor agreements. I built a visual map, red threads, supply trails, flagged bank accounts, ghost companies. And something new caught my eye. One name. Graythorn Legal Consulting. It wasn't a contractor. It wasn't even on the Army's vendor list. But it kept showing up in the background of every fraudulent shipment. Buried in email CCs, embedded in third-party documentation. I flagged it and brought it to Lynn. "This group," I said, "they're not just consultants. They're brokers. They connect the dots between the dirty logistics officers and the contractors." Her eyes darkened. "How sure are you?" "Graythorn was in every single corrupted manifest we've tracked so far. They're laundering legitimacy." That was the second moment the investigation shifted. Because that's when we realized this wasn't just a group of greedy officers. It was a network. A full-blown black market pipeline. And Kessler? He was the front door. I flew to DC under a false name. CID wanted me present at a meeting with a contact inside Homeland Security. By this point, things were moving fast behind the scenes, but not fast enough to alert the conspirators. I still had one foot in my old world, and that made me dangerous, to them. At the meeting, I was handed surveillance logs. One document hit me like a punch to the gut. It was a transfer order, signed by Kessler, dated 1 week before my discharge, moving $3.2 million in optics to a base in Kenya. Except that base. It didn't exist. I double-checked. Then triple-checked. The training site was nothing but a patch of scrubland on satellite imagery. No perimeter. No personnel. That's when it became real. They were creating phantom bases to siphon gear, moving it through paperwork, and dumping it into the contractor black hole. No wonder they wanted me gone. I'd been a spreadsheet away from blowing the whole operation open. Back in Denver, Agent Lynn met me with a tight, serious expression. "We need to talk about Phase 2, she said. "What's that?" She handed me a flash drive. "We monitor Kessler. Every call. Every file transfer. Every meeting. We know he's planning one more major shipment, something big. Bigger than the Phantom base. Way bigger. Think multi-agency. Multinational." I felt that familiar fire start up again. "What's the play?" Colonel Mitchell stepped in. "We let him do it. We let him sign off the shipment, trace every dollar, and catch every single accomplice. And then?" I asked. "We bring them all down at once." I sat on the edge of my hotel bed that night, drive in hand, realizing what this meant. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about justice, for every soldier who ever went into combat with faulty gear. It was about taking back everything they tried to strip from me. And it was about the truth. Because once Kessler signed that final form, it would all collapse. Most people assume revenge is about rage. But real revenge, the kind that sticks in your enemy's throat like a jagged bone, is methodical. It's patient. It's not fire. It's ice. And as I sat in that federal workspace in Denver, flipping through thousands of lines of coded logistics data, I wasn't burning with anger anymore. I was calculating. Kessler thought he'd buried me. That he'd wiped my name from the system and scrubbed my legacy with a stroke of a pen. But what he didn't know was that I was now part of a classified task force with full access to the very inventory systems he'd corrupted. Every shipment he authorized, I could see. Every file he touched, I could mirror. Every payment routed through Graythorn Legal, I could trace it backward. And we were about to build a trap so flawless, it would take down more than just him. We started with Operation Rainglass, a controlled setup using a fake contractor shell company created by CID. We named it Tarn Logistics, outfitted it with a polished website, fake employee LinkedIns, and even forged credentials. The bait? A falsified request for $3.8 million worth of encrypted tactical radios. I wrote the manifest myself. Requested origin, Camp Lankoro. Destination, Training Site Echo, in the outskirts of Sudan. Authorized by Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Kessler. And just like clockwork, Kessler approved it. 3 clicks. 1 digital signature. That was all it took to give us what we needed. "You sure he won't get suspicious?" I asked Agent Lynn. "He's arrogant," she said. "He thinks he's untouchable. He thinks he got rid of you." That last part made me smile. Kessler was about to learn the hard way that some people don't stay buried. The next phase was delicate. CID coordinated with Interpol and a network of embedded U.S. auditors stationed at airfields in Kenya and Djibouti. The moment the shipment left base, we had a tail on it. Then we did something bold. We delayed the transfer by 48 hours, blaming customs inspection issues. And just like we'd predicted, Kessler panicked. Emails flooded his inbox. He made 4 encrypted calls to Graythorne Legal. Then 1 unencrypted call to a known third-party buyer in Nairobi. "Get it out of customs, now," he said. "I don't care how. We had it all on tape." Then, he made the critical mistake. He uploaded an override code to reroute the shipment, unaware that CID was mirroring his terminal in real time. By the end of the week, we had a forged signature trail, direct financial payments traced to Graythorne accounts, communications logs from burner phones, and a falsified combat loss report filed before the gear even left Djibouti. He was done. But the best part? He didn't know it yet. I'll never forget the moment Agent Lin walked into our war room, slapped a file down, and said, "Final phase begins Monday. Are you ready?" I nodded. 12 years of honor. 3 weeks of humiliation. 3 months of clawing my way back. And now? Now I was about to watch the entire corrupt machine crash and burn under its own weight. I was given a new task, one that was as poetic as it was tactical. Draft Kessler's final transfer authorization. It was like sculpting his own headstone. I made sure the language matched his typical phrasing. Made sure the digital fingerprints would match his login pattern. I even embedded a redirect code that would reroute the shipment directly to a controlled hangar in Djibouti monitored by military police. The moment that last form left his outbox, it would ping across 4 agencies simultaneously. And the clock would start ticking. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at the Denver skyline, thinking of Torres, and the others still trusting that their gear would be there when it mattered. I thought of my dad, still working construction back in Billings, who'd always told me, a man's word is his signature. I thought about how Kessler had used his signature to bury soldiers alive in red tape, leaving them blind in combat, all so he could drink wine with contractors. That wasn't a mistake. That was evil. By sunrise, the trap was set. Kessler would walk into his office, log into his terminal, see the new transfer order, and, thinking nothing of it, authorize the shipment. He would believe it was business as usual. But when he clicked send, he wouldn't just be moving stolen radios. He'd be signing his own arrest warrant. There's a moment, right before the hammer drops, when everything slows down. That morning, I stood in the CID operations center in Denver. 12 glowing screens. Real-time comms with field agents in 4 countries. My palms were slick. My heartbeat matched the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. On the main monitor, Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Kessler logged into his terminal at Camp Lancoro. He looked calm. Smirking. Coffee in hand. Arrogant, like always. He had no idea he was about to become the center of one of the biggest military corruption takedowns in decades. The transfer order I'd crafted, shipment #49287A, was sitting in his inbox, flagged as time-sensitive, priority tier 1. Encrypted radios, 3.8 million in value, routed through a fake intermediary base in northern Kenya. All he had to do was approve it. Kessler clicked it open. We all leaned forward. His mouse hovered for a split second. Then he clicked authorize. I didn't breathe for a second. Then Agent Lin whispered. Got him. What happened next was a synchronized, multi-agency strike that had taken months to prepare. At 0600 local time. At Camp Lancoro, military police entered Kessler's quarters. In Washington, D.C., federal agents raided the Graythorne legal offices. In Nairobi, Kenyan officials, under U.S. oversight, intercepted the dummy shipment at the airfield. And in Germany, 2 logistics officers affiliated with Kessler were placed under arrest at Ramstein Air Base. In under 30 minutes, we had sealed the network shut. Every node. Every player. Every crooked signature. In Denver, we watched it all happen in real time. Footage came in of Kessler being escorted out of his office in cuffs. His uniform looked too big. His shoulders slumped. Without the smugness, he looked hollow. Like a man who'd built a kingdom of lies and finally realized the walls were made of glass. Agent Lin turned to me. "You ready to speak to him?" I blinked. "Wait, me? You're not a soldier anymore, Thomas. You're our consultant. And frankly, you're the reason this entire case exists." 2 days later, they brought him in, hands cuffed, face pale, a silence hanging over him like a funeral. We sat across from each other in an interrogation room. One mirrored wall. One recorder. One final reckoning. He looked at me and gave a half-smile. "Still trying to play it cool. I heard you got promoted." I said nothing. He chuckled. "What? You think this sticks? I've got lawyers. Friends in D.C. You forget who I am." "No," I said flatly. "I remember exactly who you are." I pulled out a file, his file. Every form he'd forged. Every call he'd made. Every shipment that never made it. "You remember Torres?" I asked him. His face twitched. "She's in Somalia now. Her convoy was almost ambushed last month. But she had the gear she needed, because people like me fought to keep that gear where it belonged." I leaned in. "And you? You stole from her. You stole from all of them." He said nothing. I closed the file. "I'm not here to argue, Adrian. I'm here to tell you, you're done." By the end of that week, 17 military personnel were arrested. Over $51 million in equipment was accounted for. Graythorn Legal was dissolved, and its executives indicted. Kessler was charged with conspiracy, fraud, and theft of government property. And me? I was offered a permanent role, senior investigator for military logistics fraud, reporting directly to the Department of Defense. But nothing compared to the letter that arrived 2 weeks later. An official notice from the Army Discharge Review Board. "Your record has been cleared. Discharge changed to honorable." I stared at the letter for 10 minutes. 12 years of sacrifice. One false charge. And finally, the truth. I called my mom. She cried. My dad said, "Took them long enough." And for the first time in months, I let myself breathe. I should have felt satisfied. The takedown was airtight. Kessler was sitting in a federal holding facility. Graythorn's offices had been gutted. Soldiers across 5 countries were safer because of the work we'd done. But there was one thing that still didn't sit right. He still thought it was a game. Kessler had a high-priced military defense lawyer flown in from D.C., some silver-haired shark with friends at the Pentagon. They filed a motion to suppress his confession, arguing entrapment, because the transfer he authorized was part of a CID sting. Their argument? You baited him. Technically. Yes. Morally. He'd been stealing long before we ever baited anything. But in court, technicalities mattered. For a moment, I felt everything teetering. The investigation, the justice, even my cleared record. If his team managed to get key evidence tossed, the entire case could collapse. Agent Lin and Colonel Mitchell pulled me into a strategy session. "We need more than documents and screenshots," Mitchell said. "We need motive. Pattern. Proof that this wasn't a one-time slip, this was a business model." That's when I remembered something. During my second tour in Kuwait, I'd worked briefly with a logistics officer named Sergeant Troy Weller, another meticulous numbers guy, like me. We hadn't talked in years, but I remembered something he told me in passing. Every corrupt officer has a personal vault. Not for the money. For the leverage. I reached out to Weller through a secure CID channel. He was still stationed in Germany. When I mentioned Kessler's name, he didn't even let me finish. You're telling me he's your target? Oh, man. You're going to want to see this. 2 days later, he sent over a digital archive pulled from a recovered laptop Kessler had once used during a NATO logistics conference in Ramstein. It contained dozens of encrypted PDFs, scanned contracts, internal memos, and, most damning of all, handwritten notes from Kessler himself. One line stopped my breath cold. If ever under review, scapegoat a sergeant. Bury the body in paper. Always works. That single phrase, bury the body in paper, became our turning point. It wasn't just evidence. It was intent. We compiled everything. I testified at the pre-trial hearing via closed session. When Kessler's defense team tried to push the entrapment angle, I read his own words back to him. Scapegoat a sergeant. Bury the body in paper. For once, Kessler didn't smile. But here's the part no one saw coming. That quote didn't just wreck his case. It unraveled dozens more. CID opened internal audits at 8 other bases. In the months that followed, they discovered more ghost manifests, buried orders, and falsified transfer documents, some tied to different commanders, all using the same playbook. Kessler had passed down corruption like it was doctrine. And now? We were burning that doctrine to ash. The Army quietly created a new logistics task force, Integrity Control Division, a watchdog unit built on everything we'd uncovered. Guess who they hired to lead it? Yeah. Me. I returned to Camp Lancoro one final time, this time as a civilian contractor under federal authority. Torres met me on the tarmac. She saluted, confused. They said someone was coming to review the entire inventory system. I smiled. They were right. She looked at my badge. Then she realized. Her voice cracked. You're back. Not like before, I said. This time, I write the rules. When I joined the Army at 19, I believed in two things, the uniform and the code. 12 years later, that belief nearly got me destroyed. But now, standing back at Camp Lancoro, no stripes on my arm, no rank on my chest, only a federal badge in my pocket, I realized something. I hadn't lost anything. I'd simply traded obedience for impact. Lieutenant Colonel Adrian Kessler pled guilty to all charges. The day of sentencing, I sat in the back of the courtroom. No uniform. No fanfare. Just a man with a memory. He wore the same smug look I remembered from his office. Until the judge read the full list of charges. Theft of government property. Conspiracy to defraud the Department of Defense. Endangerment of service members through fraudulent logistics practices. And then the sentence. 21 years. No parole. Dishonorable discharge. All assets seized. Kessler's eyes didn't flicker. But I knew, he knew, that everything he'd built on lies had been demolished by the one man he tried to erase. Me. But that was just the beginning. With his conviction secured, CID and the Defense Criminal Investigative Service launched Operation Vaultlight, a sweeping initiative to prevent military supply corruption. I wasn't just a consultant anymore, I was appointed lead systems integrity officer. We rewrote procurement protocols. We installed AI-based anomaly detection in shipment records. And most satisfying of all, we issued mandatory ethics training to all logistics officers, using my case as the core scenario. Kessler became a cautionary tale. I became proof that doing the right thing still meant something. One afternoon, while reviewing the implementation plan at HQ, I got a call from Specialist Torres. Sir, Thomas, you have a minute? I smiled. For you. Always. She told me she'd been promoted. Staff Sergeant. Transferred to Europe. Said the system felt cleaner now. Safer. Smarter. I thought you should know, she said. People are noticing. We talk about you, you know. Good things, I hope, I said with a laugh. Always. Then she paused. You were the first person who didn't look away. You stayed in the fight. I hung up and sat in silence for a moment. That was all I ever wanted. Months later, my mom framed the letter from the Army board that formally changed my discharge to honorable. It hangs beside my commendation from the Department of Defense and a simple black and white photo from my first deployment. But I don't need any of those to remember what happened. Because I carry it with me. Every time I sign off on a new policy. Every time I walk past a convoy filled with gear I know is going exactly where it should. Every time I see a young logistics soldier walk past me with clear eyes and clean hands. You see, Kessler tried to take everything. But in the end, I took his empire. And I built something better in its place. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.